So what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of some information that I've picked up in the range of things that I've done in my life. I decided to go into communication and really intercultural communication and public communication because it was interesting to me to see who people were and what they went through in their lives affected how they understood information and how they understood each other, really. So what we're going to be talking about today is impression building, and I'll put it in a couple of different terms, some of which I hope you'll all know. We're also going to be talking about intercultural communication, what that means, and then we'll be talking about the media's role in impression building and intercultural communication, especially as it relates to this idea of a global community and building common ground within that global community. What I'd like you to do is I'm going to ask you to draw a picture, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You'll see some of my drawing, and we'll all appreciate each other's artistic abilities or lack thereof. But I'd like you to think about the word that I'm going to say and the impression that comes to your mind, and then draw as best as you can that initial impression, the one that first comes to mind. Is everybody ready? The word is nurse. And I'd like the noun form. Okay, just take about 10 more seconds, finish off that drawing. And when you're finished, I'd like you to pass it to the person who's to your left. It's all right. And I'd like you to look at your pictures. I'd like you to look at your pictures and answer these questions about the pictures that you have now that someone else has drawn for you. So the impression that I asked you to have in your mind was the word nurse. How many of them have something to do or have this symbol somewhere? Okay. And so that symbol, to many of us, we think of the Red Cross, we think of doctors. Okay, so the medical profession. How many of your pictures, your drawings, look like women or have something to do with some female characteristics? A majority of you. One of the things that I do this exercise for, is when we talk about the role of language and how we talk about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Anyone ever heard about that? Sapir-Whorf? Okay, good. And what that says is that the language that you use can make an impression on the meaning. It's much more complex than that, I'm sure you'd agree, but in a nutshell, that's about what it is. Okay? And so when we think about the word nurse, a certain idea comes into our head, and it's very gendered. If I had asked you to think about the word senator, you might have drawn a man. Or president, you might have drawn a man. And so linguists feel like the language that we use has a reciprocal role. We both build language, and language builds us. So our expectations of what jobs you might have might be built on these ideas of what a nurse is, these impressions of what a nurse is. How many people have ever seen Meet the Parents? There was a male nurse, right? How did people receive him? Oh, yay, you're a male nurse. That's fabulous. Is that what they did?
Ask him why he didn't become a doctor.
They asked him why he didn't become a doctor. What happened? Why didn't you go on to the ultimate prize? They ridiculed him, made fun of him, laughed at his expense. And one of the things that's important, one of the reasons why I decided to open this talk with that exercise, is because sometimes when I talk about media effects, people say, the media doesn't affect me. I don't really believe in media effects. When I watch things, it goes in one ear and out the other. It doesn't really matter to me. But what we see in research is that is not true. that the words that are used, the impressions that you get from the images that you see, those all can make a difference in how you view other people and how you view situations and how you view other countries. How many people recognize that clip? Can you tell me the movie it's from? If you did, Aladdin, right? Disney movie. Lots of little kids see the movie Aladdin. How many of you recognize the song the way it's sung here? Do you ever remember the words? Do you know why? This is good. I'm glad. It's almost like I have a plant in the audience. I love it. You don't remember these words because these are the original words to the song. Several groups protested Disney and said, this is ridiculous. You can't use these words. Look at what they're portraying about Arab society. Sure, I'm going to play it again in 1 second. Look at what they're portraying about Arab society. And, is this really the impression you want to be giving, especially little kids? Okay? So, let me just see, actually I'm not going to play it again because I haven't mastered the DVD. The PhD was not in DVD use. So, but I will tell you that the original words said, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face, it's barbaric, but hey, it's home. Those were the original words, which were changed later to, and not very well, when they change words in something, it's someone else's voice, you can kind of tell. And it says something about it being dry and arid, and it's barbaric, but hey, it's home. So they're more describing the desert instead of the people there. So the first place that I want to start is with impression building. And what do we mean by impression building? It's kind of obvious, isn't it? We have impressions of people. In other terms, you might have heard the term schema. How many people have ever heard that? What does schema mean? Can anyone define schema? Just general terms. Doesn't have to be like a textbook. Give an example. I'm pretty open to anything. What's a schema? Background. Yeah, your background goes into building your schema. That's exactly right. Your schema is really a framework for understanding things. Okay, so mentally we have these schemas that are based on background information. Maybe it's information someone else told us, experiences that we've had, our education. Certainly all the things that you're doing at GPC are becoming part of your schema. The way that the human mind works is that when we see things, we want to know what we're seeing. Our mind immediately tries to retrieve information about what we're seeing. Is it something I know? Is it something I don't know? Is it something I should be scared of? And that idea of being frightened or uncomfortable with uncertainty is hardwired into our biology. How many people know what fight or flight syndrome is? What is it? Can you tell me what it is?
Basically, it was designed as a survival mechanism when humans were still evolving from ape-like to human-like.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's becoming a problem. Well, it helped us a few 100,000 years ago, but now it's kind of not necessary, but we still have a mechanism.
Okay, good. So it's a biological mechanism where people see something that maybe they can't identify or something that does scare them, and their body immediately goes into a neurological and a biological response that says either we need to fight, we need to stand and fight, or we need to run. And that's why they call it fight or flight, right? Okay. And so why is that important to what we're talking about today? Well, it's important because as we go through what I'm going to talk about, you'll see that a lot of the ways that we react to things are based on uncertainty. And in order for us to be certain, we often reach back into that schema to think about things and figure out where we've seen something before. What do we know about this thing? And so for those people who say that the media doesn't have any effect on them, I would argue that any kind of exposure, any kind of impression building does have an effect. In those few minutes when you're deciding how to react to or those few nanoseconds, really, I shouldn't say minutes, when you're deciding how to react to a situation, especially a new situation or an uncomfortable situation, your mind's going to bring those things back. Whether at the time that you saw them, you were conscious of them and thoughtful of them or not. Okay? So that's one of the premises that I'm basing what I'm going to say next on. Kind of related, and I'm just going to mention it now and come back, is the idea of priming. And we talk about that in mass communication theory. And priming, I actually wrote down what I thought was a really good definition for it so I could share it. It's the process where activated mental constructs can influence evaluation of related concepts and ideas. Let me say it one more time. Process where activated mental constructs, think schema, right, can influence evaluation of related concepts and ideas. You're primed. You're ready to look at this thing and think about it in a particular way. And we're going to come back to priming in a minute. So understanding the idea of impression building and schemas and things, let's take that and apply it to the idea of intercultural communication. First, let me ask, who can give me a little bit of a definition of communication? What do you think communication is? A shared understanding. In its most basic level, communication, and that's perfect, it's a process by which we build a shared understanding. Excellent, thanks. So intercultural communication, we would share that understanding interculturally between people of different cultures. There's one thing we all have to understand is that as people, one of our limitations is that we generally communicate more effectively with people who are like we are. Okay? That idea of mutual understanding is easier between what we call like others, so people who are like us. So when we go somewhere, when we meet someone who is not like us, that leaves us open to a lot more miscommunication. So now we have this impression that might have been built of that person, or that person's culture, or that land, that town, that city, based on some media stuff, which we'll talk about too. We also have the uncertainty of the situation, and intercultural encounters often have a lot of uncertainty. And we use communication to reduce that uncertainty. And what happens is if we have an impression, especially if it's built on stereotypes and misinformation, then we may never get to the point where we're making that mutual meaning between ourselves, where we're understanding the other person and they're understanding us. Okay? Now this short talk is not going to be about teaching you every little thing about every little culture that you will ever in your life encounter. That's not possible. But what we're going to be focusing on is the idea that we have to be an informed communication, or we have to be informed communicators. We have to understand what it is that we don't know as well as what we know. And part of that is being able to suspend judgment, to be comfortable with uncertainty, that uncertainty that comes up, and to really have enough respect for the other person so that we are actually listening to them. Okay? And so that's really the main thrust of this talk. So when we talk about building mutual understanding in an uncertain situation, again, that idea of trying to make an uncertain situation more certain comes up by using our schema, by trying to figure out, what do I know that I can relate to this? What have I seen before about this that will make me more comfortable, that will make me more certain? And that's where media can play a role. Even though if I asked you what you felt about Arabs based on watching that little clip or watching Aladdin when you were probably, some of you, 10 or something, you might say, oh, I don't even remember. I don't think it had any impression at all. Media effects researchers would say it's part of the impression that you have. It's part of your schema now, and so it's part of how you will react to someone who is from that country. Or, as we saw after 9/11, someone you think are from those countries, Middle Eastern countries. Because there were several people after 9/11 who looked Arab, who looked Muslim, who looked like terrorists. And so people were being pulled from their shops, pulled from their cars, beaten up, all the way from that to we just aren't going to shop with that store owner anymore because, they can't possibly be pro-American because they're Arab. Okay? The media had a big effect on the way that people viewed the people from that particular region. Now, I'm talking a lot about Arabs, Middle Easterners, because of the clip that we saw. But if you think back in history, this is just the most recent group. There have been other groups that the media has used as villains. When you make a movie about somebody coming to bomb the U.S. or somebody coming to, do something bad and you have to have Arnold Schwarzenegger beat somebody up, who's it going to be? You have to have somebody. When you're making a movie and you want people to laugh at the buffoon who doesn't really know how to act in the United States, doesn't really know how to be a good kidnapper, doesn't really understand the ins and outs of dealing in the United States or in a Western world, you need somebody to laugh at. And so, as a culture, the United States has chosen various other groups. Recently, and it has a lot to do with historical context, I give you that. But we have to understand how often it's proliferated from the age of children watching a Disney cartoon all the way up to people watching Borat or other movies as adults. And the issue is that just right now it happens to be this group. Before that, who was it? Germans, Russians, Irish, Chinese. You're naming a lot of different peoples. Polacks. Nice word choice there. Polish people. So one of the things that I want you to see is that from this is that I'm not trying to say that each of those film producers, each of the actors who played parts, each of those editors and those sound mixers and every person on those films had the intention of vilifying a certain group of people or had the intention of making a certain group of people look foolish and therefore not as good as Westerners or as good as Americans. But what I want you to see is there is some impact from the sum of that media on how we look at people from other cultures and how we interact with people from other cultures. And that's really important because nobody needs to tell you that the world is shrinking. How many people hear that all the time? 3 times a day I hear it all the time. The world is shrinking. It's getting smaller. Globalization. People travel more. We have the internet. So we have a lot more cause for intercultural communication now than we have ever had in the history of the world. And it will continue to grow. And so the point is to understand, number one, yourself. What are the impressions that you have and what kind of role do they play in how you interact with others? But then also, I think it's impingent upon all of us to understand and to create conversations around the idea that there are broader social messages that are being played out in the media. I told you that I would come back to priming, and I did. The idea of priming people is related, in my mind, and at least in this context, to what we would call agenda setting. How many people have ever heard of agenda setting? Good. An agenda setting is nothing more than creating a communication so that your particular agenda is the thing that's being put across. Okay? So in explaining this, now I'm going to share my drawing with you. No one laugh now. And you can hang it up later. You can frame it and put it right up. Okay? So I want to talk for a minute about framing. And then we'll come back to agenda setting, because framing has something to do with agenda setting. When you hear the word framing, you might think of a frame around a picture, right? So if I put a frame right here around this picture, you would be getting what? The whole picture, right? Now say this was a real place, gesundheit. Say this was a real place, and I lived here. And Dr. Rux was coming to visit me. And she had a very yappy, annoying little puppy. And I didn't want her to bring that yappy, annoying little puppy. So I might say, "Dear Julia," send in an email, right? "I would love for little Birdie, the annoying yappy puppy, to come visit when you come. But I just can't see him doing that. I live right next to a very busy road. And here's a picture." So as you can see, my house isn't very far from that very busy road. I don't think it's a good idea. I'm framing this in a very particular way. Now, if she had a horse, I really like horses, I might say, "Sure, bring your horse. Look at all the land I have." See the difference in framing there? The issue is that neither one of these gives you what? The whole picture, okay? And so we hear people talking about liberal media and the myth of the liberal media and framing and agenda setting in media so that, or for the purposes of the people who control the media to push their agenda. And why would they do that? Because they're trying to make a particular impression. They are trying to control what you see, what you hear about a certain situation, a certain people, a certain land, whatever it happens to be. And it's really important that we understand, maybe they're not doing it intentionally. That's quite possible. But the end result is that we think we're informed and we're not. And that can be a very dangerous position to be in. Did you ever try to go to a party and someone said, "You know where I live, right? It's going to be a great party. We're going to have shrimp." So if they have shrimp, you know they got some money going on. They're going to have good stuff there. So you're, "Okay, good. You know where I live, right?" "Oh, yeah, I know where you live." And then for 3 hours you're driving around because you thought you knew where they lived, but you didn't. Well, when we think we know something, it can be really dangerous, especially when it's something about somebody else that we have to deal with, that we have to work with, that we have to communicate with, have this common understanding with. And so one of the things that I would like you to take away with you from this talk today is that you have to know what it is that you know for a fact, what it is that you think you know because someone else told you, because you read it somewhere, because it makes sense to you, and what it is that you're sure you don't know. That's really important because all of that information goes into how we communicate with other people and how we interact and make meaning with other people. So when we talk about framing in agenda setting, in the idea that we have certain schemas, I would like you to see that what you see in the media, what you read in the media, the impressions that are being built by what is put into the media have some impact on how you communicate with others, how you are in the world with others. So it's not far-fetched to believe that while you're watching Aladdin at the age of 10 and you're laughing and you think this is funny, and I laughed too, and I was older than 10, that there's a broader context to it. That you have to understand that it's impression building. And I'm going to talk about one more sort of theoretical thing, and then we're going to have some kind of discussion, I hope, okay? And that's going to be expectations, and what we in communication call expectancy violations. So now we have the schemas, right? We have that impression that was built of people based on maybe the media, based on other sources, and we're going to talk about that too. Then we have actual intercultural communication, that interaction. So we're now applying the things that are in our minds, right? So based on what's in your mind, you often have expectations of other people and other things, right? Do you agree with that? Sure. And so when you have certain expectations of a place or a people that are built on stereotypes, that are built on misinformation, do you think those are going to be accurate expectations? Mm-mm. But to some extent, our survival instinct is based on those expectations. So if you're walking in the woods and you see a bear, you're going to react based on your expectation that their bear could hurt you, might hurt you, maybe will hurt you, okay? So when you're communicating with other people, your mind is configuring your communication. It's almost instantaneously molding that communication based on what you already know. And that's easy when we're with people who we know really well, or people who have a lot of common attributes. But when we're with people that are different from us, that becomes a little bit harder. And you know what the hardest thing is? When you're with people that you think are like you, but they're not. Let me give you an example of that. I've done intercultural training for educators. And one of the things that has come up is in talking to them about how they work with their students who are from other countries. I remember particularly this one teacher, very well-intentioned, and by all rights, probably a very good teacher, who said that she didn't understand what was going on in her class. She had a whole group, and these are her words, she had a whole group of Asian students who never seemed to do the work. They never seemed to get anything done when they were doing their group work. She didn't understand it. And I said, okay, when you say Asian students, tell me what's going on, what's happening. Well, I see the Asian students and I put them in a group. And I say, you guys work together because they're all Asians. I thought it would be easy for them. The problem is that though she was well-intentioned, she was working from a place of ignorance. That she's thinking all these people look Asian, and whatever was in her mind about what makes people look Asian made her also believe that they had the same belief systems, maybe the same political ideals, maybe the same language, maybe the same attitudes about school. And so she felt like she was doing them a service by putting them together. So because we already know what? That communicating with like others is easier, right? But what was the problem here? What do you think the problem was for that teacher in grouping these people together? They're not all alike, right? So she fell into that trap of people looking a certain way, and so you have expectations or you make inferences based on how they look. Okay? I'll give you another example. You can meet people in your everyday life and you would never know who they are. You would never know who they are. I went to the hardware store to get some stuff because I was building something in my apartment. And I had on, like, you know, what do you wear when you're building stuff? You wear tattered clothes, a little bit of paint on stuff. Just running to the hardware store and running back, right? I'm not trying to run for Miss America. And I meet this person, and she starts talking to me and kind of disclosing some stuff that was pretty interesting. And I was like, okay. You know, she was unhappy in her job, unhappy in her marriage. And it was just all coming out as I was standing there trying to buy a few nails and some screws. And I can't imagine what ran through her mind when she signed up for a course and her professor walked in and it was me. Because she had made she probably never would have guessed by the way that I was dressed, by the way that I was, what I was buying, what I was talking about doing, that she would ever run into me again. So she felt pretty comfortable disclosing all this personal stuff. And then to have to sit through this, she wound up dropping the class. I was sorry to see that, but I think she was just too uncomfortable. But I want you to think about all of the times in your daily life that you make assumptions about people based on your schema, based on maybe what you know about someone else who looks like them, what you heard about their group, whatever group they belong to. And think about that and think about whether that's really helping you to be a good communicator, to build common ground, or whether it's hindering you in that process. So what I'd like to do now is, again, a little bit of an assignment. I'd like everybody to take out a piece of paper. I want you to think of 3 adjectives that describe you. But, now here's the but, don't start writing yet. 3 adjectives that describe you, but things that you don't think other people would know by looking at you. So 3 adjectives that describe you, but are things that other people might not be able to figure out just by looking at you. Okay? So let me give you an example. You might not be able to figure out just by looking at me that I love sushi maniacally, I'm ashamed to say. Okay? I bet there are still sushi chefs here who remember me from when I lived here. But to look at me, you might never guess that. Okay? So, go. 1, 2, 3, go. I wanted you to do this, and I see a couple people are still finishing up, but I want you to really look at those words and think about those words. How important is that thing, is that adjective, and what it represents to who you are, to your own self-identity, and how you are in the world, how you act in the world. Now think about every person that you run into in your day-to-day life who has those 3 things and maybe many, many other things that you are unaware of just by looking at them. Now think about all the people that you see portrayed in the media. And think about those 3 things that you can't tell just by looking at them, but are important to who they are and what they believe and what they value. And what happens when we communicate with people, when we interact with people on such a basic level that we're not cognizant that everything that they are is not apparent by how they look or how they're portrayed in the media. When we talk about culture, we often talk about culture in terms of an iceberg. Has anyone ever seen this before? You could draw it. Your drawing's probably better than mine. I'll try. So you have an iceberg, right? What do we know about icebergs? They're big underwater. Good. Right. Lots bigger underwater, right? Everybody see Titanic? Okay. So when we talk about culture, we talk about it in terms of an iceberg. And we call what's up here big C culture. And what's down here? Little C culture. Big C culture are the things that you can see, the things that are apparent above the waterline. So things like traditional dress, traditional food, language, all of those things are big C culture. Holidays, celebrations. When you're in a class and you're learning about other cultures, a lot of times what you learn are, Cinco de Mayo and Hanukkah and traditional foods. And look, this is what people wear in South Africa. But it's a traditional garment that if you went to South Africa, you'd see hardly anybody wears that. Okay? And so we often see this big C culture and we miss the little c stuff. The tiny little things that make a big difference or can make a big difference in how people interact with each other. Things like values. Is it okay to kick a dog? How does your culture interact with animals? How does it interact with nature? I was in Belize recently with some students from the University of Vermont, and there was a little girl who had captured a bird, a baby bird that had fallen out of its nest. And she strung that little baby bird's feet together and put a loop around its wing and then proceeded to drag it around town. I can tell by some of your faces that you're having the same reaction that I did. And so what do you do in that situation? Well, you make judgments, don't you? Oh, what a cruel little kid. That's horrible. That's terrible. Someone needs to step in. Where are her parents? That's usually the next thing, right? What happened to her parents? Why isn't someone stopping her? The idea, though, that really understanding and connecting with the idea that we can't know all of this is that we try to suspend judgment. We try to not make judgment, and we try not to treat people like we are in judgment of them. All right? When we talk about the media, it can make a big impact on how we think things should be or how things will be in another place. Okay? Now, how many people have seen Borat? Okay, several people. How many people won't see Borat? Just no time, huh? Okay. One of the questions that I wanted to pose to you as we start moving more into the discussion aspect of this is, do you think that something is funny if everyone isn't laughing? What do you think about that? Do you think something's not funny if everyone's not laughing? If everyone, maybe Dr. Rux made a joke at my expense while we were here, and everybody thought it was really funny except me because it hurt my feelings, made me cry maybe, made me angry. Would it still be funny? Yeah, you'd still be laughing, right? Yeah, it's still funny. Maybe I took it too seriously, right? But what happens when that happens on a grand scale? And you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are laughing at stereotypical images. Is it still funny then? And why? Does it serve any kind of common purpose for a greater good? And what? What do you think? When you went to see Borat, were you thinking, oh, that's wrong? I know what I was thinking. We watched it together, and I was saying, they're saying they're from Kazakhstan, but that guy's speaking Armenian. So I kind of was very particular in the way that I watched it, I think. And again, my schema, having lived in Armenia, played a part in that. But what do you think? Well, I can say one thing for sure. You would think differently if that joke was about you. You may not want to admit it, but I think that that's true. If the joke was on you, if the joke was based on stereotypes of people that you were in a group with, that you felt related to, that you felt were important to the way that you define yourself, you would feel differently than if it was not. When we talk about agenda setting, when we talk about framing, and when we talk about things like when we make a movie, we need people to laugh at, or we need people to beat up, we have to understand that we're making an impression on people, but at the same time, what are we doing to the people that we're vilifying or the people that we're laughing at? And so this is not me coming here as an expert and saying this is how you should think and this is how you should feel. And if you're a good American, this is what you'll do. And if you're a good scientist or a good researcher, this is how you will feel. It's more about just putting some information out there for you to think about. Okay? So in the end, what I want to leave you with again, besides some ideas from communication like expectancy violation and framing and agenda setting, what I also want to leave you with is the idea that we can build common ground, that we need to build common ground, that we do that through, number one, suspending judgment and going into situations, understanding what we know and what we don't know. But really that ability to suspend judgment about other people is very important. We also need to make sure that to some extent we're fostering mutual respect. When I say to some extent, we might be thinking, oh, we should always foster mutual respect. But remember the idea of mutual in there, okay? We have to have mutual respect. And that really comes from listening to the other person. Think about how much you listen in a day. Really notice, am I really listening to that person, or am I thinking about what I'm going to say next? Am I thinking about how unimportant this stuff is to me? So really listen. And the final thing that I would say that we need in building that common ground, and you're not going to be shocked by this, can you guess what it is? Communication. We need communication, and listening plays a part in that. But we need to understand that communication is a process. Communication is not telling someone else what to do. Communication in this context is listening to what they need, listening to what they want, understanding how that fits into a bigger picture, and then doing what you can. Okay? Well, that's really all I have. I hope that you have some questions, and they're not, where did you go to art school? Because that's apparent nowhere. You can't blame GPC for my artistic abilities. Yes, we have 3 student respondents, and so we will be looking at them to lead the discussion.
If there's anyone to blame, do you think as a society as a whole is an individual basis thing for us to educate ourselves on, I guess, communication and how important it is to communicate with different cultures? Or is it the billboard media? Because we often, when I talk to people about music, well, you know, they're saying these things in the lyrics, but is it us because we're buying it and we're listening to it, or is it the people who are manufacturing?
That's a really important question. And it's a question, is there someone to blame here? Should we be thinking about, and I'm going to kind of narrow it down, you tell me if it's okay. Should we be thinking more about educating the public to be informed consumers of information, whether it's music, and you gave music lyrics as an example? Or should we be blaming the media, maybe trying to regulate the media more? Is that a fair? Okay. First, let me say that at this juncture, we don't even need to talk about blame, because you know what? Blame doesn't matter. We just need to move on from here. This is going to be part of my own personal beliefs, and that is that I would much rather see an informed public than a lot of laws and restrictions and parental advisories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why I say that is because I think that if you're informed and you're a critical thinker and you can listen to, Eminem's lyrics or watch a movie and say, you know what, I laughed at that, but, what else does it mean? And is it okay for my children to see that or to listen to that? Are they going to have the mental capacity and the education and the experience to really be able to understand what's going on there? So I think education is a key. It's a big key. I think that an informed populace is oftentimes not in the best interests of the people who are setting the agenda for our media. An informed populace has never been I'm trying to think if there's an exception. Maybe I shouldn't say never, but I'm hard-pressed to think of an exception. But I don't think that an informed populace has ever been in the best interest of the people in power. Whenever you see new regimes coming in, they always want to get rid of the intelligentsia, the people who are running the show, the professors, the leaders. So I think that that's a tough thing, because I think that the same people potentially who are running the media, who are setting the agenda, are also setting the agenda for education. And isn't it better to teach you how to take a test? We won't even teach you how to solve a problem in math. Instead, we're going to teach you the guess and check method, which means we're going to present you with a few answers and you just guess which one's right and then you check it. And eventually you could guess and check for each one. But what do you do when those answers aren't presented and you can't guess and check? We haven't given you the skills to be able to do that. We haven't really given you the opportunity to practice those skills in a supported environment in order to really do that. And so that idea of education is very important to me. I guess that's kind of obvious because I went into education. But so it's a biased response. Does that answer your question okay? Probably too much. I'll try to keep it shorter. Yeah?
Just as students, what would you say is one or two things we could do personally, I guess, to avoid being overly influenced by the media, or just to stay informed in that way?
One or two things that you could do as students or others to be more informed and to keep from being influenced by the media. I would say the number one thing is to understand that most media does have an agenda. That most media does have an agenda, especially informational media. That there is some agenda that's being met there. I would also say that you need to be critical of what you watch. That doesn't necessarily mean that you no longer laugh at things or you no longer consider things. Oh, well, this is how these people are portrayed in this film. Let me consider that. And do I think that's true? I think a lot of times what we believe it's based on several factors, really. What we believe and the influence that the media has is based on several factors. One of them is how early in our development were we first exposed to these messages. Because we understand that the earlier it is, the more weight it will carry for a longer amount of time. The other thing is, how many times are these messages repeated? And over how many different mediums? And the third thing is kind of a combination of having a credible source of information, saying, well, the President of the United States said that, so that's a credible position, and I'll believe that. Okay, or not. I see people making some faces, or not. Okay, I'll give you that. Or when we're not really concerned about the credibility of that source, the suspension of judgment about the credibility. And that's what we see happen a lot in entertainment. Oh, it's funny. Oh, it's just a kid's movie. oh, it's just a comedy. Oh, it's just a film. Oh, it's just a television. But when you think about television show, when you think about the other two things that I talked about, the other two factors, how young you were when you were exposed and how often you see it, that third one kind of doesn't make sense anymore because you keep being exposed to the same images. For those of you who weren't here, we watched a very short clip from the film Aladdin, the Disney film, and it was the Arabian Nights song. And I won't put you through the torture of singing it to you, but I'll tell you that the clip that we watched was actually the original song, which many of you, I would guess, have never heard. Because it was protested. Because it says, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. They changed the words around fairly soon after it was released. I would guess not even a matter of months after it was released. So the soundtracks and those DVDs and videos that you own of Aladdin are not the original movie as it was presented in theaters. And they changed it to something like it's hot and the heat is intense, it's barbaric, but hey, it's home. Something very, kind of very different. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you need to be critical thinkers. In the end, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD or a 6th grade education. It doesn't matter if you live in a small town or you live in the big city. It doesn't matter if you're green, orange, purple, white, pink, black, brown, red, spotted, I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you take the initiative to be critical, to be an informed consumer. And sometimes we're not going to get all the answers. You know, one of the things about framing is that when people hear on the news, for instance, when I was living in Armenia, the CNN kept saying stuff about Armenia like it was war-torn and it was a dangerous place. And at some juncture, they had an issue. I guess it's not really an issue. The prime minister was killed in the ministry. And, you know, my mother was freaking out because she's hearing all these reports on CNN. Because that's the only venue that she had to get information. Because I couldn't call all the time. I couldn't email all the time. And so my mother was much more concerned about me than she was thinking, let me think critically about this. You know, let me think about what might really be going on in that country. And so I guess my warning is to understand that a lot of times the impressions you have, the information that you have, was already set through an agenda. There are things happening in Somalia, in South Africa, all over Asia, all over the former Soviet Union, that you have no idea about, that I have no idea about. And it's because they do not put them on the news. And yet we'll hear from every different news outlet 5 times, 50 times a day about what Anna Nicole Smith's autopsy report might say, who might be the father of her baby. Meanwhile, there are genocides going on, but we don't really see it on TV. So I would say that primarily the thing that I would like you to do is to be informed consumers and to understand that the media is a business. I'm not trying to come down on the media, let me say that. The media is a business. In the days of reporters being the fourth estate and being the watchdogs, I believe are waning. I hope they wax again, but I believe they're waning. Yes, sir.
Could you say like the reason why the media might report the whole animal cruelty thing is like because like people buy into it?
Mm-hmm.
Because news about animal cruelty will sell a lot faster than news about Congo, Darfur.
Yep.
We kind of partly know them. Isn't the general public sort of kind of to blame for the reason why the media reports happened before Congo, Darfur?
Okay, so the question was, or the comment was, the people, the audience, are to blame to some extent because they're the ones buying it. They're the ones tuning in. When they start talking about Darfur, how many of you switched the channel? What's on MTV Cribs? I don't know. Let's see. Right? Did you say yes you did? Or okay, hold on 1 second. I was like, that's good to admit. Wait, we're open here. No one will tell. And it goes back to the idea of Anna Nicole Smith sells. And so my comment to that would be, media is a business. The commercials are really the reason why you're there. The commercials are really in the agenda that's being set in television shows, on newscasts every day, and perpetuated throughout the nation and really globally, are being set because of business. It's a business endeavor. Okay? CNN would not exist if people stopped watching. When people change their channel because they don't want to listen about Darfur, that's really depressing stuff. Let me see what's on Gilmore Girls, because that's not so depressing. Okay? Then they're telling that business, this is what we demand. Remember supply and demand? Media is a business. Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a really good documentary, I believe it's called Outfox, about the Fox News group and about the gentleman that owns the company and how he owns a huge percentage of media and how it's just a funnel for one-sided information. And it really does talk about how anchors would say, I really don't want to report that, and they would be dismissed.
So Outfox does give a very important story. It does tell a very important story about the media ownership, some things that we should all be very interested in, very active in deciding who we're voting for based on this important information. It is also as biased as any other media because it's giving you one side of the story. Okay?
Dr. Gregory?
Yes.
I'm a journalism instructor, and you're sitting
Hi.
on my yes button.
I'm glad to hear it. Let me. Go ahead.
Our nation, our republic, was established with the idea that the electorate had to be informed, and that an informed electorate was necessary for us to be able to function as a representative democracy. And that makes it everyone's responsibility, not just the media's responsibility, to be informed, but it also makes the media extremely important in our way of doing things.
I believe that too. Is to think about when our democracy was set up, who was that informed electorate? It was not everybody. But now we have changed that through changing our Constitution, changing the way that our government is run. So it is our job to be informed. So let me go, because I kind of skipped over you, and I'm sorry.
I was just going to say maybe the switching the channel thing has to do with the flight or fight reaction. We don't feel like it's something we can fight, or it's a fight we can't win. So we just
Okay. Good. So sometimes it's just, it's not that you're that interested in what Kid Rock's concert schedule is, so you want to go to MTV. But it might be that sometimes we see things and the problem looks so big that we feel like we can't do anything about it. I can't go to Darfur and see what's happening and make people listen. The issue is that sometimes we're not cognizant, sometimes we don't really think about the effect that our inaction has. And that's a problem. It's a problem maybe not in our lives because we live here and we go to work and we go to school, and should I buy a Taurus or a Toyota, Corolla, and we have our lives. But at the same time, there are other people in the world who do not have what we have. And so what is our inaction doing to us as a global culture, as a global society? And I talked a little bit about the idea of being more global and the world shrinking and all those things. So we have to think about that. And, one of the interesting things A lot of the research that I've been talking about, the theories that I've been talking about, are used primarily in looking at political communication and political public or mass communication. And what kind of agendas are politicians setting and how are they framing issues, right? You can see that. It's kind of a natural thing. However, we need to be thinking about just what's on TV at all, what's making it to the TV at all. And so if we want to be an informed electorate, what are the other avenues that we have for being informed? And they could be blogs. They could be video weblogs. They could be news outlets that are not run by Rupert Murdoch, potentially, okay? But the one thing that I want to caution you about, because in our endeavor to become more educated, sometimes we rely on sources that we are unsure of their credibility or that we have not questioned their credibility. And so just be careful of that too. Yeah, and then we'll come over there. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to your, when you were speaking about communication and at its basic level is a shared understanding. Mm-hmm. My question for you is when you have the different cultures and let's say you have the breaks in the generation, like if I'm sitting down talking to my grandmother and she's looking at the media, but the way that the youth is portrayed, oh, we don't care, that's not us, or we're loud, we talk back. How do you, I guess, what would you suggest for us? What would be the way to describe who we are versus how they were when they were our age and what they went through versus what we're going through now?
Okay. So the question was, when you're sitting down with someone who is of another generation or maybe from another culture, and we can definitely define culture in part by generational differences, how do you sit down with them and say, I know what you're seeing on the media, but, you know, Laguna Beach is not my life, right? That's not it. That's not the life that I live. This is the life that I live. I'd say number one is to, you know, live the life that is right for you, number one. So it's almost like, have you ever seen me doing what they're doing? Have you ever heard me saying what they're saying? Okay. Because it's that action that really defines you and not your words. But we use our words to describe that action. And so open communication is really important. But open communication is hard. Open communication is something you have to work for. And you have to work at. Having a good relationship where you can have open communication is something that you have to work at. And so my advice to you would be to start talking to that person, whether it's your grandmother, your grandfather, even your parents. You know, we all know about the kind of stereotypical, what is that music you're playing? Oh, that's awful. Oh, I think my ears are bleeding. Why don't you listen to Steely Dan? A little bit of Journey, you know, something good. No, you got to listen to this stuff. What is this? And so every generation has gone through that. And, you know, that idea that you forget what it's like to be a kid, maybe that's true, but it's open communication and it's letting someone else into your life that's really going to help negate that and help them to see that.
Why we turn the channel? Is it possible that we're living in a fantasy world, that we've been programmed for so long to accept what has been given to us on the media, and because of this, we choose to just not want to get involved because it's going to make us critically think. It's going to make us change the way we think about things and maybe start to care and maybe want to take action. And action means work. It means sacrifice. And maybe we just don't want to go that route right now. We're comfortable in our comfort zone of where we are right now inside of this bubble.
Mm-hmm. The question was, is it in part due to maybe some kind of programming that things should be this easy or things should be this way, that we think that inaction is easier and that it's more comfortable for us? I think in general that's true. I can tell you that, and you might be able to tell just, you know, by thinking about it in your own life, then it's easier to lay at home and watch the TV than it is to get up, take a shower, get in your car, go to work, and do the things that make your life work. It's easier to change the channel, as you said, it's easier to change the channel and watch something different than to think about these things like what's happening in Somalia, for instance. It's even harder and a huge step away to actually take action. To say, well, I saw this TV show, let me see what's true, let me see what's going on there, let me talk to other people. All of these are different tiers of action. Let me talk to other people. Let me try to affect change in my area. Let me try to affect political change. Let me actually go there and try to affect change for the people who are there. So all of those are kind of tiered levels of action. I think it's definitely easier for us as a society to say, I'm not going to pay attention to it. What can I do for those people? I'm pretty comfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable that they're, not as comfortable as I am, so I'm not going to look. And we see that every day. We see people step over a homeless person in downtown Atlanta, that people are not paying attention. And that's a personal choice that you have to make. Are you going to, if you say that our society kind of breeds that complacency, then I'm going to say yes, because that's my opinion, and that's what I've seen in my life, and that's, the impression that I have right now. That's the belief that I have now. Certainly nothing has happened to dissuade me from that belief. And that's why I went into education, to be quite honest with you, because I wanted to inspire people, and I hope that that's what I do. So we had another, did that answer your question okay?
Watching the news today, it's very difficult to try to figure out who's credible and who's not credible. Mm-hmm. I mean, I watched Fox News, and a couple of years back, they found some canisters, as an example, in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And I was watching Neil Cavuto, and at the end his commentary was inferring that they had found weapons. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I know that they never found anything, and the canisters were just there, empty. They were not what they were looking for. So I'm saying, if the mainstream media, you really know if they're credible or not. Who can you trust? You talk about the blogs, the blogging on the blogs. The information is questionable as well, because there are certain things that they write, like World Net Daily, and those things I know as a fact is not true. So how would you know who is telling the truth and who is just giving you an agenda, a spin? How do you know?
I wish I could give you a name or a website that you could go to and that I could tell you right now, this person always tells the truth, or this website is always credible. You teach journalism. Do you have a name or a website? It's credibility. Even if they're credible in one story, something may happen that they're not credible in another. I think, again, it goes back to the idea of education and being an educated consumer of information. And it kind of involves that idea of suspending judgment. No, we definitely, I think we have a tendency towards, and you see if you agree with me, but I think we have a tendency towards a rush to judgment. Oh, I see cans, this is what they said it was? Okay, that's what it is. Oh, bomb them.
Journalists are not machines, and they are captives of their frame of reference, just like every other person on the planet. So that means that you have to balance what you are hearing with somebody else. I could not give you the name of one person. I would say that person was credible in every issue. No.
I mean, I wouldn't even give you my name, because the one and only thing that I know for certain is that I am not always right. You know how hard that is to admit, especially when you've worked really hard to get a PhD and you teach. What it's like to stand up in front of a group of people who are, cordially allowing you to talk and talk and talk and talk and say, you know what, there may be things that I'm telling you that turn out in 10 years to not be right. Maybe in 10 years they'll do some kind of research and say, agenda setting, it wasn't true. I can't imagine that happening, but I can't preclude the possibility.
There's Not much agenda setting anymore, at least not coming from the media. We do tell people what to think about, but we don't tell people what to think.
Right. But others would say that telling people what to think about is agenda setting, because like I said before, we don't even know what's going on in Darfur or other places. I think that one of the issues that's kind of coming out here is that credibility and the idea of the validity of news or the validity of information, it's tough. It's tough to figure out. So what do you do? Well, as a researcher, I don't believe the one thing that I see. I want to measure it several different ways and do triangulated research. So I'm not going to believe one news story. I'm not going to believe one news reporter. I'm not going to believe one blog. I'm first going to believe my own firsthand knowledge. So I knew what was happening in Armenia. And when I read blogs and when I saw CNN, I knew it wasn't quite what was going on. To some extent, it was pretty far from what was going on. You have to be able to really look at a website and see who's putting the website up. When you read a newspaper report, a lot of times you'll see some institution or some think tank that's being referenced or that's being cited. You need to know who those people are. What's their mission? What are their goals? What do they study? What are the limitations? Who belongs there? Does this sound like work? How many people do you think do this that aren't getting paid to do it?
And yet it is important work.
Mm-hmm.
Society is to function the way it was designed to function.
It's very true. Very true.
How do we motivate our students and young people to open themselves up to things outside their comfort level, like generational differences, religious differences, cultural differences? You know, there a lot of times it's so much more comfortable to be with someone who's just like yourself. Mm-hmm. So when you do meet people who are different, all you see are the differences and not the similarities, and you don't try to establish a bridge. How do we motivate them?
I think the question is, how do educators...
Maybe they can tell us.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the target group that we're all working with.
That's right.
I wonder if anybody has any insight for us.
See that? Yep. The question, let me just repeat it so that everyone can hear. The question is, what can educators do? When I stand here and say that I want to inspire you, that's why I went into education, and I do literally mean each and every single one of you, that there's got to be something we can do to inspire people, to get them to build these bridges. What do you think those things are? What do you think those things are? And this is an important enough question that I want to use a pedagogical tool to getting the answer. So I want each of you to think about something that a teacher can do to reach out to you, to get you to want to make those bridges, and I want you to write it down. How can a teacher help you as a student to bridge the gap with people who are not like you? What can they do to inspire you to do that work? I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be with college students, would you? I wouldn't think so. Let's do that. When we can discuss it a little bit, but for those people who are not comfortable with speaking out in the group, I still want to know what you're thinking. So just take a couple minutes to do that for me.
Well, I was going to say that the main problem with people, I guess, socializing with someone that's different is that they think that they don't see past differences. But I know when I went to another school before I came to this one,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the assignments in the course was to it was a world history course, so we had to talk about the Cold War and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the assignments was to actually go to someone who lived during that period and interview them about their experiences during that time and the things that they could remember. And I think that experience, that interaction, forced me to look past differences. Well, me in particular, I don't necessarily, I guess, reject or shun anyone because they're different, but it's just when you feel that you learned something from someone, it forces you to look past the difference, because whether it's a grade or, you know, some type of assignment, then you get to know the person a little better, and then I guess you figure out that you really don't have much that's different from the person apart from, I guess, where they grew up or some of the cultural things that they, some of the cultural things that they do.
Okay. So that maybe one of the things that teachers can do is create assignments that sort of push students, require students to make those connections.
But when creating those assignments, you should probably take away some other ones. I mean, don't ask.
There's we get it. Okay, let's go over here and then here.
One of my questions to myself, and I guess everyone here, is do we fear accepting other cultures because we don't really know our own? There was an international festival that we have annually, and it celebrates the diversity here on the campus, and we understand different cultures. And as I was there, I was excited. I thought it was very interesting, tasting the foods, watching them dance, and then I felt like, okay, where is that? If I had to go to another culture and I guess display my culture, what would we do? I mean, and it's a question: do we have a culture? Yes or no? And I mean, it's just a toss-up. And one of the things that you were saying was know yourself, like know what you know. Is what you're taking as fact, is this something that someone told you or not? Some things that educators do that I've had done in the past that really made me upset, they'll sit down and they'll say, okay, well, you guys, there's these type of people. I'm not going to say a person A from a different culture, from a different country, they're better at this than you guys. Or, like, don't compare because, like we said, you should be educated enough to know that people are different, they come from different backgrounds, and everyone can learn, I believe. I guess if there's a problem. And just don't compare different cultures and different people based off of things that they can't control necessarily.
Okay, that's a good point. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say a good way for teachers to implement contact with people outside of your culture is to work with refugees and teaching them English and writing. This campus is in the middle of Refugee Central, and there are people just down the street that have lived a totally separate life than what we can ever imagine. And so when you go out and you reach out to people that want to know English, that want to have a job, that want to have the life that you have been given, it really sets a tone for yourself and understanding how lucky you are to be in such a great situation, and to help always makes you feel better. So maybe a mandatory refugee learning journal of your experience with refugees. That is a really good way to get them exposed.
One of the things that I would caution about, though, in having people volunteer is that you're very clear about what they're bringing to that volunteer experience, what the outcomes are of that volunteer experience. There's a whole line of research that looks at volunteers as saviors and how unhelpful that is to the people that they're purported to be volunteering for and helping. And this kind of mindset of going in and saying, I can answer your problems, I can solve your problems because I'm American or whatever. And just understanding that as you go in, it's a learning process that's reciprocal. It's on both sides. And I don't think that what you said precluded that understanding, but I just want to make it very clear because we never know who's going to watch the tape. Okay? Very good point. Yeah?
I mean, maybe not as educated, but as a community have, like, more diverse educational institutions. Because, I know I grew up when I was, 6 years old and under in a very diverse community, and it just helped me because it's like, if I see something on TV, I was like, oh, well, I know so-and-so, and she's not like that, or her family isn't like that. So that helped me to think critically, even at a young age. It was just like, okay, they say this, but I've been to her house, and I know that they don't do this, and they don't make those noises or do stuff like that.
Okay, so just trying to create a more diverse atmosphere in learning institutions, which is difficult. It's difficult. And, it's not there's not a simple solution to it. And I can tell you that I've done talks and workshops and all kinds of things on intercultural communication, and more than once I've been asked, in essence, what's a white lady going to teach me about diversity? So, and my answer to that is, I feel like I'm the person, speaking for me personally, I feel like I'm the person who needs to know the most about it. And so I have made it a study. And not being a part of someone's group does not preclude you from trying to understand what it means to be a part of that group. Yes, sir?
If you think that who is the most, ethnic minority in this country they also have their hatred in their heart. And this is a really sad thing, because if you're a minority, you're more than likely to be a victim of discrimination or a victim of hatred, because what you have no control over, like your skin color, your religion, culture, background, whatever. But the sad thing is, think about who are the most homophobic group in our society. This ethnic minority groups, and then and then interracial marriage or some other things, like minority groups are more secluded. They're just in their own, and there's a wall, they're buried between the minority groups. And then I think that's really sad. So what I'm saying is, our society is like that. Teachers, so I believe teachers can do something, but it's gonna be really hard, because American literature book, where's the slavery hymn in that book? Where's about the Native Americans poem or like that, where Pocahontas, whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's all about white people, you know what I'm saying? And then with that textbook, how come the teachers expect to educate students about diversity, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I think I do. I hope I do. I think part of the issue is that we sometimes are limited by materials as teachers, and that's too bad. Many of the teachers that I know go outside of the course materials to make sure that they're bringing diversity into the classroom. It goes back to one of the three things that I said I wanted to leave you with, and that is that in order for us to find common ground, to really find common ground, we need to have mutual respect for each other. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be everybody's best friend, but that needs to mean that I respect them. We also need to be able to suspend that judgment. We need to be able to communicate with each other. And we need to really be open to the idea that we don't know everything and that we don't have all the answers. And that the answers are not simple. Because we like to throw money at a problem or ignore a problem. Everything in between is tough for us. So we need to wrap up. You had some really great comments, some really wonderful questions. I so appreciate your being here, and I hope to get to talk to you some more as we move across the hall for food. Thank you.